Yo, what's going on, guys? Hope you all having an amazing day so far. I don't know if you watched the advert for the Olympics recently, I guess a couple weeks or months ago now. But while I was watching it, which I will link it down below so you can watch it in full, but while I was watching it, I was just like, wow, this is just really great cinematography. Like, every scene you watch, you literally see all the different like cinematic elements that you see in like true cinema stuff. And it's like, I was watching, it's like, who DP'd this? Because whoever done this, the whole team behind this advert done an amazing job just looking at it. So I kind of wanted to break it down and kind of answer the question of what elements actually make a cinematic image a truly cinematic image. Now, the term cinematic is thrown around a hell of a lot. You see it everywhere now. You cinematic LUTS, cinematic B-roll, anything that you want more clicks on, put cinematic in front of it. There you go. And it's not really quite correct, if that makes sense. Not to say I'm the boss of who decides what is cinematic and what's not, but when you really break it down, something that's cinematic is something that represents or resembles something of true cinema. And when you think of true cinema stuff, you think of the likes of, the Avengers, Dark Knight, Blade Runner, these big productions where they are using a lot of cinematic stuff, I guess. And there's just certain elements that are in every cinematic production, in pretty much every scene, or most of them anyway, that truly does create a cinematic image. So that's what I want to break down today while using the Olympic advert, just a few stills from that to kind of show you as an example of these different elements. So the main goal with a cinematic image is really to make it as 3D as possible. That's pretty much it. You want to make your two-dimensional screen that you're watching it have as much depth as possible. You want to make the image as 3D as possible, so you can do that with the way you light things, with the amount of things in the picture, in the image. So there's different ways to do that, and we'll break that down. But just know in your head, your main goal is just to have something as 3D as possible. So the 6 main elements and 6 main ways that we're going to make an image as cinematic as possible and as 3D as possible is: 1, to backlight everything, have a reverse key on what you're lighting. 2, to create depth, have foreground, midground, background. 3, shooting into the shadows or maybe a silhouette. 4 is just to create light and dark ratios across the image. 5, to have motivated light, whether that's from practicals or just a motivated light source. And lastly, having reflections and shadows, and just all of these things. Your aim is just to make an image as interesting as possible, creating depth and having as many things going on as possible, but not overcomplicating it, but just keeping it interesting, not having just blank space. For example, what I have right now, if this painting wasn't here, this would just be negative space and be quite boring. But this painting here isn't necessarily distracting, but it is providing something. It's providing a little bit of interest. Same thing, having a few things on the shelves there, they're providing interest, so it isn't just lost and boring. Because I do have it on, what do I have, F2, so it's not completely in focus. I'm the one in focus, so obviously I'm the subject, but these things here are just making the image more interesting as opposed to making everything very plain. So obviously pretty much every scene in this whole advert follows the rules and has the elements of these cinematic images, or the elements of a cinematic image in every scene. So I'm just going to break down 3 for examples that are my favorites of this advert, but of course, as I said, they're in every single one. So if we start with the boys boxing in, the boys boxing in the kitchen, we can see we're shooting through this doorway. The door's half open. We have boys, the subjects here, the window where they're being lit from, and that's pretty much it. That's all this scene is. But the reason why I like this, and the reason that if we go through the elements of this, first off, we have depth. We're shooting through something. We can see here, this door, the wall here, we're shooting through, creating depth. Because if this door wasn't here and you were just on the boys, that's taking away a whole layer. But this creates another layer by having layer 1 of the door, layer 2 of the boys, layer 3 of the back wall, layer 4 of outside. Obviously you can barely see it, but it still counts. So yeah, that's the one thing of showing depth, making that a 3D image. Next one is, where's the light coming from? Well, the light source is obviously this window here, so it's being motivated by, I guess, the sun. You'd think that's sunlight coming through. Obviously we know that's not sunlight beaming through perfectly.
very unlikely that it's sunlight beaming through perfectly. And you can see a little bit of haze in there as well. So yeah, the motivation for that is obviously sunlight coming through your window, so coming through your door, and along with that, the direction. They're being backlit. The light is on the opposite side of the camera, reverse key lighting. So we're shooting into the shadows because of the backlight, shooting the shadows, creating more depth. Because if this was on the opposite side and we were shooting on, you know, the highlight side of his face, the image would look a lot more flatter, shooting into the shadows, shooting into the dark side, where you see that contrast to the light side creates depth, as opposed to shooting on the light side, everything looks a lot more flat. Another one is the floor. They've purposely chosen these, you know, wooden shiny floors just so you have that reflection. You can't even see much on the reflection, but just that little bit from the fridge, the highlight of the fridge, and with the shadows, it just creates more interest. You know, there's a reason why they have this highlight coming across here, this slash, and then the shadow here, just so the image isn't so boring. They need to have as much going on without being distracting, just so you're not looking at boring areas. And lastly is just looking at the light to dark ratios. Obviously we have a bit of light, dark, just having contrast across the screen, making it as interesting as possible. Obviously the checkerboard light dark thing in this image isn't as drastic as it can be in other images we will go through, but this image here just has the elements of a cinematic image with all of these things. It has the backlight, it has the reflections, it has shooting into shadows. It's a 3D image, you know, you're shooting through the doorway. This just doesn't look like a flat image at all. So that is why this is one of my favorite images, or favorite scenes from this advert, and you can see the way it is a truly cinematic image. So this next one here is probably one of my favorites from the whole commercial, just because they're running on this part of the sand for the exact reason of the reflection. Like, there's no other reason, because when you run on sand, even though running on sand is horrible, but when you run on sand, you always run on the dry part. Like, you don't want to run on this like weird kind of sticky, splodgy bit of the sand. It's just annoying. So, but to make this image more cinematic, they love this reflection. This would be called a wet down. You know, in nearly every single film, when you're filming a night scene outside, they will wet the floor just to make it more interesting. Having these bits of reflections just make an image so interesting, because not only do you have the reflection of the light, you have the reflection of the people here. What does that do? That creates more interest. It creates more depth. It makes the image just look more more appealing or pleasing. So yeah, that's obviously one aspect there. You have the reflections here, as well as the kind of shadows coming in, where the shadows coming from, the light source, backlighting. We are reverse key. The light source is on the opposite side of the camera. Again, another element of being of a cinematic image is backlighting your subject. And then because the sun is on this side here, we are obviously shooting into the shadows. Another element of a cinematic image. And the last thing that I want to point out on this is just the depth. You know, you can see, even though this is an image where we're looking through anything, there's nothing majorly in the foreground, but look how deep this image goes. You know, you can see this person's a lot closer to the camera than these people are. And all of these people are a lot closer than, I'm going to say these are like sand hills or something, or are these clouds in the back? I don't know what they are, but because it's not a completely clear sky, it's creating more depth. You know, this, it could be fake. It might not even be there. More times than not, it's probably real. But having all of this in the sky helps to create depth, helps to create interest, because it's just not plain. It's not empty negative space. So all of these things are there to help create an image. Like, this is all done on purpose. They could have had a clear sky. If they wanted to, they could have made that sky clear. But that negative space creates, it's just boring. As I said, it's negative space. Here, all of this, it's not completely smooth, flat. It has a little bit of stuff here to create interest in the image, so it's not so flat, not so boring. So yeah, there's just so many things going on, even though it's such a simple image of a load of people running on a beach, but it just looks chef's kiss. And the last one that we'll go through is this guy here watching Usain Bolt win yet another race. Now, when you really think about this, well, one, it's silly. Who would watch this in a locker room? Like, who watches TV or watches highlights, whatever it is, inside of a locker room? strange place anyway. But when you look at this, you can see there's so many things as to why they chose this as an interesting place to record this scene. First off, if we look, where's the light source coming from? Behind. We have this projector and probably in a stereotube above the subject here, which is on the opposite side of the camera, backlit, and one element of a cinematic image. Next on, we'll go through depth. We can see the image isn't flat. You know, if we were just shooting like this, it's a flat image. You know, we already have two layers. We have the subject and the projector. But because we aren't like this, we are like this, we can see we have a door frame here going into the room, 1, 2 layers. Then we have the subject and the lockers, 3 layers. And then we have the back wall where the projector is, 4 layers. So all of that creates depth because we aren't in a 2D image. We are stretching it out, shooting straight through into the projector, into that backlight to create depth. Next, which is quite obvious, we are shooting into the shadows, which is obviously created by a backlight. Again, creating more depth because we aren't shooting on the highlight side, so we're able to see the contrast from light to dark to get that difference. Yet another element inside this image is the reflections. You know, they have this floor on purpose. They have these lockers here on purpose. So they are reflecting parts of the projector to create more depth, more interest in the image. So it's not just, you know, matte lockers that are just absorbing the light, but you're seeing a bit like here, you can literally see how the blue here from the track edge is still there. The advertisement stuff is still here. The green is all there inside the lockers to create more depth. And the same thing on the floor here. You can see the legs of the chair. You can see all of this on the floor. All of that is creating depth, or creating interest because you have the reflections there. And then the last thing is the light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. That checkerboard, having the interest across the image. And that is pretty much all the elements of a cinematic image just in this one shot alone. And that's pretty much all I wanted to go through today. Like, if you're looking for inspiration of how to create a great cinematic image, watch this video with your eyes closed, pause at any random point, and there you go. You have an example. Like, there's so many variations of how they're using the elements of a cinematic image within this. Like, even this one, which I was going to go through as well, but didn't want this video to be too long, of the girl standing on, I have no clue what these things are called, but on these balance board, whatever these things are, on these, you can see the light source is all the way at the back. You know, the sun shining through, being a motivation light source, coming through the building, her standing on this balance beam, is that what it's called, balance beam? Her obviously shooting into the shadows. You can see the depth of the whole room, but there's just so many examples across this whole advert, so I definitely recommend watching it. I'll leave the link down below for the advert, and that's pretty much it. So if you have got a lesson, a laugh, or a light bulb moment from this video, I would really appreciate if you drop a like down below. And if you're feeling extra nice, you could hit that subscribe button as well. But with that being said, I will catch you in the next one. See you.
Said I woke up to the summer shining through, calling on my friends asking what's the move, feeling a little different, I'm on something new today.